every person that I've come in contact with in my role as a trustee who's working with our students, who's a part of the sector, just the genuine care that they have for students has been, I think, really inspiring for me. And what the adults in these rooms and in these systems are willing to do for our kids, I think is really incredible.
Welcome to the Education Matters podcast. As another school year begins, there's a quiet rhythm returning to communities across the country. Classrooms are filling, routines are forming, and school boards are once again balancing the complexity of serving students, families, and entire regions. It's a good moment to reflect on the people who make that possible, leaders who move between the local and the provincial, the strategic and the deeply human, people like Tracy Loffler. Tracy serves as the president of the British Columbia School Trustees Association and board chair of the Mission School District. But titles only tell part of the story. What seemingly defines Tracy's leadership is her steady presence and her belief that good governance is inseparable from good care. Her journey began in small towns in BC, like Fort St. James, Courtenay, Kelowna, Nelson. 7 communities in all by the age of 15. That experience gave her more than just adaptability. It grounded her in a deep appreciation for what makes public education both personal and profoundly complex. It also helped form her view that education systems work best when they're locally rooted but collectively connected. In this episode, we talk about what she's learned from serving as a trustee and how that informs her work with BCSTA. She offers an honest look at the complexities of running school districts, evolving role of trustees, and how her organization supports board chairs and district leaders across all 60 BC school districts. We also talk about the quiet, behind-the-scenes work of supporting safe and inclusive schools, and the importance of policies that actually serve students, not just structures. Tracy shares her thoughts on the promise and tension of AI in education, the need for child-centered flexibility, and how BC's frameworks around equity and accountability in particular are shifting conversations across the country. What I really appreciate most is that Tracy doesn't default to big declarations. She brings a kind of clear-eyed optimism, the kind grounded in real work, real relationships, and a deep respect for the public good. So whether you're listening in BC, Ontario, or anywhere across Canada or the world for that matter, this is a conversation about what it means to lead with both structure and heart. Without further ado, here's my conversation with Tracy Loffler. Tracy Loffler, welcome to the Education Matters podcast. Where does this podcast find you today?
Thank you, Jason. I'm here today joining you from the traditional, ancestral, and unceded lands of the Stalo people in Mission, BC.
Excellent. My brother-in-law is actually in Mission right now. That's his new home.
It's very beautiful here. Mountains, rivers, forests. It's pretty gorgeous.
Yeah, so I've heard. We'll have to get out there one of these days. Tracy, before we kind of dive into your background and everything, can you give folks just an quick overview of your current role and what keeps you busy these days?
Yeah, so I am currently the president of the BC School Trustees Association here in British Columbia. I was just recently elected in April, having been the vice president for 2.5 years, and then on the board of directors for 1.5 years prior to that. I'm also a school trustee, the board chair here for Mission Public Schools, and I've been a school trustee since 2014. And so in my role as BCSTA president, I am happy to be joining you today.
Well, thank you. And I believe you're the second trustee I've had on, the first from BC. And then, of course, I'm very, very interested in BCSTA and the role and function that serves across the province. But like we always do, I'd love to start with some of your background. Can you tell me where and when you grew up?
Yeah, so I have lived in BC all my life, but by the time I was 15, I had lived in 7 different places across the province. And so I was born in Fort St. James. From Fort St. James, we went to the island, Courtney Comox. From Courtney Comox, we went to Fort St. John. From Fort St. John, we went to Maple Ridge. From Maple Ridge, we went to Kelowna. From Kelowna, we went to Nelson. And then from Nelson, we moved to Mission. And I have been here ever since.
And was this like throughout your childhood or like teenage
Until I
years?
was 15. Yeah, 7 places by the time I was 15.
What was that like? Those are a lot of very different communities, I'd imagine.
They're very different communities, but it's like anything. It's all I knew. And, it brought my siblings and I closer together, that's for sure. And has certainly given me, a perspective about how different, how unique different parts of this province are, having lived in, multiple corners of it. So.
Can you kind of highlight for me how you and your siblings played as children? What was that like?
We played outside a lot. Yeah, we played outside a lot. So that was what we did. Exploring,
fishing, that kind of stuff, riding bikes.
We were just always outside. It just didn't seem to matter. We were just outside, either playing sports or exploring all those different things. Like I said, 7 different places in 15 years. We got to do a lot of different exploring.
Right. What was one of the first things you remember loving to learn?
I would have to say reading, learning to read. And I still love to read. So I would say that, learning to read was probably one of my favorites.
Is there a book in particular, maybe when you were younger, that stands out that you're very fond of?
Actually, The Secret Garden by Frances Hodgson Burnett.
Yeah, that's a great one.
Was a classic, yeah.
So when it comes to your actual education, it sounds like, several different elementary schools. What was that like?
Well, again, I would say it's just, it's the only thing that I knew. So, it was, you go in at different times of the year, and definitely interesting to see, where different, classrooms were at in terms of curriculum and different things like that. But we always were surrounded by educators and people that just really cared and did what they could to make us feel comfortable, to make us feel welcome. It was, in a lot of ways, it's very unique, but it's also, I think, it's made me a very adaptable person.
Yeah, I would imagine so. Were your classrooms like kind of like the ones I grew up in, like traditional desks and rows, or did it vary at all? I don't know. I have this, maybe it's a romanticized version of what education in BC is like. I just imagine you guys, especially in the areas that you grew up, with just with that contact with, nature was a bit different than what we had maybe here in Southern Ontario in the big city.
Yeah, no, I would say that, no, they were that kind of traditional sense of classroom. And then, of course, it just depended on, where the school was situated geographically. So let's say in Fort St. John and in Kelowna, we got to play outside in the snow at recess and lunch, right? We were sledding down hills and doing those kinds of things. Whereas, let's say when I was in Maple Ridge or on the island, you're not getting that kind of snow, and you're not getting that same kind of play experience. And so it just depended on where. But yeah, again, we did spend still a lot of time outside.
Is there anything from your childhood that you wish kids today could experience?
I would think just that ability to be outside and have that kind of freedom as much as we were. We were just literally I just remember being outside a lot and just playing and being with friends and, again, exploring. And that would be one thing, I think.
And I do get the feeling that BC is better at this than most other provinces. Like, I have a bone to pick with my kids' school every time they're inside for any drizzle that's happening outside. And I give them the example of, like, I work with a lot of BC schools, and if they kept the kids inside when it rained, they'd never go outside.
Yeah.
So I get this feeling that BC schools still do it a bit different.
Yeah, certainly. We're very familiar with Muddy Buddies, the overcoats and rain suits that the kids get out in. A lot of our schools have outdoor classrooms, if you will, and some of those are covered. Some are circles of just big rocks, gathering places. But yeah, certainly we do spend a lot of time outdoors, and all of our students are encouraged to wear rain gear
to get geared up. Well, on that note, Tracy, you served as trustee for a while, and I do want to spend the majority of this conversation talking about your work with BCSTA. But in your role as a trustee, can you describe some of the most inspiring things you've seen?
Yeah, I thought about this, and it actually came pretty quickly. I really think, as much as I was saying when I was a child, that we had educators, that cared. And I think that every person that I've come in contact with in my role as a trustee who's working with our students, who's a part of the sector, just the genuine care that they have for students has been, I think, really inspiring for me, and what the adults in these rooms and in these systems are willing to do for our kids, I think is really incredible. And the other thing that I find inspiring is when we talk to, let's say, trustees from around the province, if you start asking them about kind of the programs that they have, that they're offering, and what their students are doing, the pride in the work that their students and staff are doing is just incredible. And so I would say for me, it's the people that I find the most inspiring.
Yeah, that's certainly been a common theme here on the podcast, is that folks that dedicate their lives to education, really give a part of themselves to make a difference. And it's kind of like it's a quiet acknowledgement, just other colleagues and folks in your purview that get to kind of see it across the province can share that. So I appreciate you taking the time to articulate that. You've also had exposure, I imagine, to a lot of classrooms and varied classrooms. Is there something that all great classrooms have in common? Or can I ask this a different way? What do the best classrooms in your view look like, sound like, feel like?
In my view, I think that classrooms that are safe and inclusive for every student is what the best classroom looks like. And those safe and inclusive spaces are where students are allowed to express who they are and how they learn in ways that feel authentic to them, and where they can, learn at their own pace, where they feel comfortable, where they feel safe, and a place that they really genuinely want to be.
Are there some things that you wish, actually, let me ask this a different way. What are the most important things for parents to understand about the system?
Well, having been a parent of the system, I would say that it is a really large, complex system. And I know that when I first got elected as a school trustee, when you think about schools, you think about teachers and students and classrooms. But if you actually take several steps back, when you look at, we've got school boards, we've got, senior school board officials, superintendents, secretary treasurers, we've got, board office staff, we've got principals and vice principals, we've got teachers, we've got education assistants, bus drivers, IT people, maintenance, like all of it. It's a really, really large system. And in most communities, your school district is one of the largest, if not the largest employer in the community. And so I think just understanding how big the system is can be helpful. And the one other thing that I've learned in this role of being a school trustee is that there's always a reason for something. So if someone has made a decision and it's like, well, why did they do that? And what have you? Generally speaking, there has been, sort of a well thought out, well informed decision that's been made, and you may not agree with it, but there have been, and there are moving parts that you simply just, for privacy laws, et cetera, you just can't be made aware of. And so that I think is the key, is it's such a massive system.
Yeah, and I appreciate you articulating that, because that was actually one of the reasons that I launched a podcast, is that so many folks outside of education, and I think it's because we've all gone through the system, all have very, let's call them hot takes on what could happen and what should happen.
Mhm.
But they don't necessarily understand the complexity of it. And that was one of the biggest things I learned coming into the system, was really how complex it is. And then the other thing that struck me is how really brilliant a lot of the people in Canada, right? My experiences mainly in Canada, are, that run the systems. And then brilliant, and as you mentioned already, have this really high degree of care for a diverse group of parents, students, teachers. Um, I think it's really important to articulate that. And so thank you. I also want to ask you, though, about that role of the trustee. I think a lot of people understand, like, it's public oversight of our public institutions, but I'm not sure a lot of folks really get what the day-to-day work life is like for a trustee. Can you take us into like a day in your shoes?
Yeah, it's a lot of meetings, really. Like it is a lot of meetings. That is what we do. And I think, that's the important distinction that you made, is that we are overseers. We're governors of the system. We're not making the district function. So we
Mm,
oversee the district. We sort of set the direction, but it's staff that actually makes the district function. And so we do tend to be in just a lot of meetings, and a lot of that is a lot of uh, reading and preparing for these meetings. We have some pretty extensive agenda packages, checking in with uh, folks in the community, being current with what's happening in education in the province, across the country, those sorts of things. So.
awesome. Um, and now if we can turn the conversation to your role as president of BCSTA, and maybe we start by giving the audience, whom is made up of folks from Ontario, a lot of edtech sector folks, but can you give them a sense of who BCSTA is and what the organization does to support the education sector in BC?
Sure. So the BCSTA, we are a member-driven association, and currently all 60 boards of public education are members of BCSTA, and we're like an umbrella organization. We don't have any authority, let's say, over school boards, but we do assist to be a collective voice for advocacy. We support boards with professional learning opportunities for good governance practices, good leadership practices, assisting with legal and policy work. And a lot of the work that we do at BCSTA as well is just kind of quietly supporting boards behind the scenes.
Mm,
Whether we're having conversations with board chairs, just trying to assist them in any way possible so that they can make well-informed decisions and practicing that level of oversight that's going to best lead to outcomes for
mm.
students.
So maybe we can make this a little bit more tangible if I ask you to give me some examples of some important initiatives you've been part of, either as president or I think you were board chair, was it previously?
Mm-hmm.
But just some important initiatives that BCSTA has been shepherding over the years.
Yeah, so I think one that's really important is the framework for enhancing student learning. And this was a requirement that came out. The process started in 2020, and it's something that I was personally involved in my role at BCSTA on the board of directors, with creating some of the reporting requirements. Pardon me, creating some of the reporting requirements for this framework for enhancing student learning. And so what
Mm,
has happened is that every year, school districts, school boards are required to report out on typically underserved populations, specifically First Nations, Métis and Inuit students,
mm,
children with disabilities and diverse abilities, and children and youth in care, which the data tells us those students are not being well served. And so this reporting order means that we are reporting out on those. And so BCSTA, we were involved in co-creating some of the reporting requirements and descriptors around that. And I
mm,
think where we were really where our voice was important at that table, because if it's boards of education that are required to report out on these underserved populations, then we need to make sure that the reporting requirements are conducive to the work of boards of education, not just necessarily staff. And so that was something that I think that BCSTA, we were able to make sure that the trustee, the board voice is a part of that.
And you mentioned you also do professional development for trustees.
Mm-hmm.
What does that work like? Like, I mean, it'd be great even in the example of, you help them develop these important reporting tools so you can identify populations that need support. Do you then, sort of provide additional support for those trustees to address those issues, or is it, you kind of deal with a variety of issues as well?
Yeah, so I mean, it encompasses our professional learning events encompass everything from hosting events where we have our Trustee Academy every year in November. We have our AGM every year in April. And so these events are a great opportunity for trustees to come together to get that unique perspective of the other districts within the province. And that's one of the things that we hear the most, is that connection with other trustees from around the province is actually really essential to their professional development. But as part of our formal programs, we offer workshops, whether it's, communications, whether it's governance, whether it is, your legal obligations around safe and inclusive schools, First Nations education, reporting requirements, and all of those sorts of things. So if there's anything happening provincially, in terms of new policy coming from the government, we assist boards in being able to translate that and what that might look like in their districts. We do also offer, we have quite a lot of resources on our website for trustees. And so we've got a lot of sort of publications, learning guides for trustees to be able to use. And we're currently working on it's a leadership management standards course for trustees. We're currently piloting it. And we're hoping to have it rolled out here, in the next, I think, year or so. And so this will be able to, trustees and boards will be able to take these courses depending on their unique needs.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's super important work, because we were talking earlier about the complexity of the system. And I don't think people realize, like, because of the nature of the public oversight, people on boards are not experts in education.
No.
And there are so many, as you identified earlier, so many different slices that you need expertise in. And somebody coming, with let's say a business background or what have you, they think they understand management and processes, but they don't necessarily understand, how implementing a new curriculum is different than doing training at a big bank or something like that.
Exactly.
Right? Yeah.
Yeah.
So I find it fascinating, that kind of work, and then how you're doing that. The other piece that admittedly I don't have a good grasp on is how government policy and, trustees, as well as obviously like the actual superintendents at a board, kind of interface. Can you kind of explain the co-governance relationship or model that you have with the BC government?
Yeah, so we have a very good working relationship with the Ministry of Education, and essentially the government, the ministry, sets the what. So the funding, the legal framework, policy, et cetera, and boards decide the how. So how are we going to implement those policies that are going to best serve each school district's and community's needs? And ideally, all of us understand that it's a shared responsibility, and that both levels have to work very closely together in order for students to achieve the best outcomes.
Yeah. So looking ahead, what are the most pressing policy issues you see on BCSTA's horizon?
Yeah. Well, I think that with our role at BCSTA being to support boards in their policy development and that is going to be what BCSTA is going to be doing. So whether that is policy like we've assisted with before, working in conjunction with the government around trustee code of conduct, whether, I know that there's some work being done on trustee use of social media policy, those working together. And so our role is going to be more about supporting boards as the need for new policy arises. Right. We're talking AI, these sorts of things. And so our role is going to be, how do we best support boards in that? What are the best practices? And being that resource for boards.
Yeah, and you mentioned AI, and that was actually going to be one of my follow-up questions because I've been, and I know we discussed a little bit about my background in the past, but not only have I worked with BC districts for a long time, but I was working in an area of, helping modernize the curriculum through new and innovative technologies on the pedagogy side. Mm-hmm. And it was always kind of like the coalition of the willing, those that wanted to engage students in different way or recognized how important different media is for students to get them doing all those great competency-based things that the curriculum entails. But now with AI, it feels different. Mm-hmm. And if I can just articulate the reason why, and I'll let you kind of respond, is that in some sense, and now BC is more ready for this because of your curriculum where you were ahead, I think, of the rest of the country. But it does really upset the apple cart in terms of traditional assignments. Like all the assignments you and I did growing up, they're all AI-able, right? They're actually things that AI is very good at doing.
Yeah.
Now, the competency-based curriculum starts to shift its attention away from just the output into the process. But what's that like at the policy level? Like, how are you guys starting to think about it? How, and if not actual policies you're making, because I know it's still early days, and I know BC is ahead of a lot of the rest of the country. But how are you starting to think about it? How are you starting to talk about it? And what impact do you think it's going to have?
Yeah, well, I think when it comes to AI and policy, I think it's recognizing that there are different policies are required for different folks. AI policies for students and how they're using it in their learning is going to be different from policy around employee use of AI in their work. What does AI use for trustees look like? These are the sort of things that are going to be coming up. And so again, our role will be to assist boards, recognizing that there are various levels of AI policy that are going to be required. Some things that they may want to consider in their policies, those sorts of things, and providing, lighthouse practices for those policies as well. And it's just continually coming back to, how can we support these boards in whatever policy they're creating to really focus on that high quality public education that's focused on student achievement. Whatever policy like that in BC, that's in our School Act. That the primary role of a school trustee is to improve student achievement. And so I think keeping that at the heart of all that we do, whether we're talking policy, professional development, that is the North Star.
Well, so then let me ask you a question too. You have all these districts that have, different needs, different priorities. How does BCSTA ensure that like all those voices of your 60 member boards are kind of represented in your advocacy? That must be a challenge.
Yeah, it is. Certainly what's happening up in Nisga'a is definitely different than what's happening in Coquitlam, right? And so those needs are very unique. And so we have a couple of structures. One structure is that we have separated all of our boards into regional branches. And every branch has a liaison from the board of directors. And every month, the board of director liaison contacts the board chairs in that branch with, sometimes there are specific questions for input that we're looking for. We're also always wondering, like, how's it going in your district? How can BCSTA support you? So that happens every month. We also have board chair calls, like Zoom, board chair calls, where we're getting lots of input from those. we do try to send out surveys. Like I said, we get a lot of networking at our events. And recently in June, having been newly elected as president, I connected with, gosh, I want to say like almost like shy of a few people, almost every board chair of the 60 districts. And, anywhere from a half hour to an hour, some of these folks, we had these conversations about what is specifically going on for them in their districts. And so I think it's like anything, it's like taking that time to have the relationship and being open and willing to listen. And again, it was a really wonderful experience in connecting with all of these folks from across the province, just as we were winding the school year down. And, recognizing that, we've got some really unique challenges, but we've also got, a lot in common, right? We've got a lot in common. And, again, like I mentioned, just the pride in the work that they do and just that focus on, doing what's best for kids and building confidence in the education system.
Just out of curiosity, do you connect with other folks in your role across Canada at all?
Yes. So BCSTA is part of the Canadian School Boards Association. And so myself as president and our CEO are members of that Canadian School Boards Association. And so there are a number of provinces and territories that belong to the Canadian School Boards Association. And we all work together to raise public education to the federal level. It is mostly a provincial jurisdiction, but there are some, federal issues that we have in common.
Yeah, like all day kindergarten, I think would have been a big one over the last few years, right? That I think we got federal funding for that impacted.
They've got some funding around childcare there and that, but recently, when we're talking around Indigenous education, food programs, equitable access to technology and connectedness, along with comprehensive school health, mental health, addictions, etc. So
I'm just kind of interested in BCSTA's stance around, addressing child poverty, mental health supports, and equity of access. You just mentioned, all of those really. Yeah. And they're going to be increasingly more important as days go on. Yeah. And so just wondering how you look to support or advocate for those needs in the schools.
So what I would say is that, we've got the students that are arriving in our classrooms have a lot more complex needs. As a trustee since 2014, I can see that the needs of our students are becoming increasingly complex. And, when I started as a trustee, we weren't doing childcare. We weren't doing, food programs. And so one of the things that we've done and worked with the government on is the Feeding Futures program and funding for, food for students in schools. And so, looking at how could we, support these students in learning, making it stigma free, all of these sorts of things. And we're certainly seeing the needs the needs and the requests for subsidy around this increasing.
Well, thank you for that, Tracy. I think I would like you now to kind of put your, Marty McFly Back to the Future goggles on and look 50 years into the future of education. From your purview, what does it look like? And you can feel free to answer this, the good, the bad, and the ugly. Like, if we don't get it right, what does it look like? If we're going to get it right, this is what it'll look like.
Yeah, thanks. I really feel like, what I mentioned in the beginning with what an ideal classroom looks like. We talk about it a lot, but safe and inclusive classrooms and schools and spaces for students. Like I said, where every student can express themselves and how they learn in a way that is authentic. And, we know that when kids don't feel safe, they don't learn. And so, and that is one of the core pieces of our advocacy at BCSTA. How do we make sure that we have safe and inclusive spaces for our students? How do
Mhm.
we advocate for, capital funding to make sure that the spaces that the students are learning in are, conducive to learning for these students as we progress to the future? With recruitment and retention, how do we make sure that the folks that are in those classrooms and in those schools and in this system, how do we make sure that those folks are serving students in a manner that helps them feel safe, that helps them feel welcome, and helps them succeed, right? Because that's the ultimate goal here. Every single one of us is here because we want to see students succeed, right? And so that's the role that we keep advocating for, those things: safe and inclusive schools, funding for buildings and structures and learning environments that are conducive to learning for students, and just making sure that it's all focused on what's serving students.
So if I gave you, from your purview, and you have a wonderful purview because you deal with all of the 60 school boards, which and in the province that I think is leading Canada in terms of education in a number of ways. But from that purview, if I gave you a magic wand, and I do want you to remember that this is an all-powerful magic wand, and that you could do any one thing, any number of things to education to make it better and to support all students and make it safe and all that stuff, what would you do?
Yeah, I've thought about this a lot over the years, and really the one thing that I think would be for every single student to have some sort of individualized learning plan. And, I understand probably that the current structures that we have in place may not support that. But I think that if we can give students a choice about when and where and how they learn, and have learning plans around that, I think that's going to be what's best for student outcomes.
And with that, Tracy, my last question is always, what podcast, book, video, movie, music album would you recommend to the audience?
So this one was kind of a no-brainer for me, and I have to say Ted Lasso.
Oh, wonderful. Wonderful. I'm just getting my kids into Ted Lasso, by the way.
Because it's so great. The message around believing, around being hopeful, around working together, to supporting one another, being a part of a team, and just genuinely being, a caring person that wants the best for everyone. To me, that really sums up, why I'm in this work, right? I believe that every student can achieve their best possible outcomes. I believe, and I hope, and I know that when we all work together and focus on our shared priorities, that's when we're doing what's best for students. And I just think that those messages are so important, and it's so important to remain hopeful in this sector. We know that there are challenges. But I think if we can focus on our shared priorities, the things that we want for students, keeping students as our North Star, is really what's going to set us all up for success. And that's certainly what I'm hoping for back to school, right? We're approaching a new school year. And so this is what we want. We want to start the school year with hope and belief and anticipating, a great year for everyone.
Well, this is going to air on the first day back here after Labor Day. So I think that's a wonderful message to send our colleagues off with. So Tracy Loffler, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you so much for having me.
This podcast is recorded on the territory and Treaty 13 lands of the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation, and on the traditional territory of the Huron-Wendat and the Haudenosaunee. The show is edited and produced by the marvelous and talented Andrew Mastroianni. If you like what you're hearing, make sure you subscribe to us on Spotify or wherever you listen to your podcast. Until next time, remember, there's absolutely no inevitability as long as there's a willingness to contemplate what's happening. I'm your host, Jason Bucheri. Until next time.